I never thought I'd be writing this, but here I am, pouring my mess of a life out for strangers to judge. It all started with what felt like the perfect life. You know? You see people post their ideal relationships online, and you roll your eyes thinking, yeah, okay, let's see how long that lasts. But then you realize at one point, that was you. You were the idiot with the perfect life. Or at least I thought I was. Kate and I were together for what felt like forever. We had this cozy little place just outside of London. You know, the kind of house with a small backyard, a quiet street, and neighbors who nod at you in the morning. I'm a marketer, nothing flashy, but it pays the bills. Kate, she's a project manager. She always had this artsy side, like into paintings, sketching, and that kind of thing. Me? I've always been a sports guy. Sundays were for football, and she respected that. Life was simple, stable. And then, last year, we had our anniversary. I still remember that day like it's burned into my brain. We threw a small party at home. Just close friends, a few drinks, and laughs. The usual, right? I wanted to make it special, though. So I surprised her with tickets to Italy. Yeah, I know, a bit cliché, but I figured it'd be romantic. When I handed her those tickets, she lit up. That smile, fuck, I can't even describe it. It was like everything was right in the world. She started telling our friends about all the places we'd visit, the wine, the art. The future seemed bright. But here's the thing. I swear, the second that party ended, something shifted. It wasn't obvious at first. Just little things. Kate started coming home later than usual. She said it was work, that they had deadlines and all that crap, but I've known her long enough to spot when something's off. She'd spend hours glued to her phone, but when I'd ask, she'd brush it off. You know that feeling in your gut when you know someone's hiding shit from you? Yeah, that started creeping in. I tried talking to her. I wasn't an idiot. I wasn't going to accuse her right away. So I approached it softly, asked her if everything was okay, if work was stressing her out. She just gave me this tight smile and said she was fine, that I was imagining things. But I wasn't imagining anything. She was becoming more distant, more secretive. That's when I talked to Jake. He's been my mate for years. Solid guy, the type you can count on. We met up for drinks one evening, and I just unloaded everything. Told him about the late nights, the constant texting, how she was avoiding any real conversations. Jake didn't sugarcoat it. He told me to keep an eye on her, that maybe she was hiding something. I didn't want to believe him, but deep down, I knew. The problem is once the seed of doubt is planted, it festers. And while all this was happening, my job was turning into a nightmare. I was getting pressure from my boss, deadlines were piling up, and I couldn't focus. How could I? Every time I tried to work, my mind would wander back to Kate, wondering where she was, who she was with, what she was doing. It was eating me alive, and the stress just kept building. I started doubting myself. Was I overthinking? Maybe it really was just work keeping her late. But the signs were all there. You know when you've been with someone long enough, you can just feel when something's wrong? Well, I felt it, but every time I tried to get her to open up, she'd brush me off or get defensive. I remember one night, I asked her why she was being so secretive with her phone. I didn't even accuse her of anything. I just asked casually. She snapped, said I was being paranoid, that I needed to trust her. But it wasn't just the words. It was the way she said it. It was like she was trying too hard to convince me everything was fine. That night, after she went to bed, I sat on the couch and stared at the ceiling, my mind racing. I started going over every little thing in my head. Her late nights, the sudden change in mood, the goddamn secrecy. It didn't add up. I kept telling myself I was being stupid. We'd been married for years, I loved her, and she loved me, right? But love doesn't explain everything. People change. Relationships rot from the inside without you even noticing. And by the time you realize, it's too late. Things kept getting worse after that. She'd come home late, avoid conversations, and act like I was the one being unreasonable. I stopped sleeping properly. Every night was a battle to keep my thoughts from spiraling. I started noticing every little thing. Like, she'd be texting someone late at night, then lock her phone the second I walked in the room. Or she'd get dressed up for work, more than usual, and not even bother explaining why. It was like she didn't care if I noticed. Or maybe she thought I was too dumb to see it. I thought about following her a few times, just to see what she was really up to. But I didn't. Not yet, at least. I kept holding on to this tiny thread of hope that maybe, just maybe, I was wrong. Maybe it was all in my head. Maybe Kate was just stressed, and I was overreacting. But that's the thing about hope. It can turn you into a goddamn fool. And I was the biggest fool of all. I couldn't take it anymore. The doubt, the sleepless nights, the constant back and forth in my head, it was driving me insane. So one day, I just decided, fuck it, I'm going to follow her. I didn't have a plan. I just knew that I needed to see for myself what was really going on. It was a Friday evening, and she had told me she'd be working late again. Something about a project deadline. I told her sure, no problem, kissed her goodbye, and watched her walk out the door, my stomach doing somersaults. I waited a bit, pacing around the house, trying to keep myself from puking up the little dinner I'd managed to eat. Then, I grabbed my jacket and left. I tracked her from a distance as she walked to the tube station. It felt surreal, like I was in one of those shitty movies where the husband suspects his wife of cheating, but is too much of a coward to confront her outright. But this wasn't a movie. This was my fucking life unraveling in real time. She didn't go straight to work. Nope. Instead, she hopped off at a station she never mentioned before and walked a couple of blocks. I kept my distance, hanging back far enough that she wouldn't notice me, but close enough that I wouldn't lose her. My heart was pounding in my chest, each step confirming what I'd been afraid of for weeks. Then I saw him. Rupert. Her fucking boss. They met up at some quiet cafe, like they were regulars. He was already there, sitting at a table by the window, looking casual as hell in his suit, sipping on his drink like he didn't have a care in the world. When she walked in, he stood up to greet her, and I swear the way they hugged, it wasn't just some professional greeting. It was intimate. Too intimate. I stood there just outside the cafe, staring like a fucking idiot while they sat down together, talking and laughing. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Was it really just a work meeting? Was I being paranoid? But then he reached across the table and touched her hand, and that was it. The last shred of hope I had, gone. I didn't stay long. I couldn't. Watching them made me sick to my stomach. I turned around and left, feeling like my insides were being ripped apart. I knew something was going on, but seeing it with my own eyes, it was like a knife to the gut. The next day, I went into work trying to act like everything was normal, but inside, I was a fucking wreck. I couldn't concentrate. My mind kept replaying the image of them together. That's when one of my co-workers, a guy I'd known for years but wasn't particularly close with, mentioned something in passing. He said he'd seen Kate and Rupert together at some fancy restaurant a few nights ago. He said Rupert was known for taking special employees out for dinner after work, but there was something about the way he said it. Like he knew. Like everyone knew. My blood ran cold. That was it. That was the final nail in the coffin. A few days later, I got an anonymous letter in the mail. No name, no return address. Just a plain white envelope with my name on it. Inside was a note, written in shitty handwriting, detailing everything. Kate, Rupert, their after-work meetings, the hotels they'd been sneaking off to, even the times and dates. It was like someone had been watching them and decided to fill me in on all the dirty little details. At first, I thought it was a joke. Like, who the fuck sends a letter like that? But as I read through it, the pit in my stomach grew deeper. It was too specific to be fake. Whoever sent it knew things only someone on the inside could know. And every word I read felt like another punch to the gut. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, my mind spinning out of control. Kate came home late again, slipped into bed without a word, and fell asleep like nothing was wrong. I wanted to shake her awake, scream in her face, demand answers. But I didn't. I just lay there seething in silence. The next morning, I tried to confront her. I couldn't keep it bottled up anymore. I needed to know the truth. Kate, I said, standing in the kitchen while she made her morning coffee, we need to talk. She looked at me with this blank expression, like she had no idea what I was talking about. Talk about what? About Rupert. About what's really going on between you two. Her face didn't change. No shock. No guilt. Just that same cold, distant look she'd been giving me for weeks. You're being ridiculous, Oliver. He's my boss. That's it. Bullshit, I snapped. I followed you, Kate. I saw you two together. And don't tell me it's just work, because I know there's more to it. She stared at me for a second, her eyes narrowing. So now you're spying on me? Real mature. I wouldn't have to if you didn't keep sneaking around, I shot back. I got a letter, Kate. Someone sent me a fucking letter with all the details. You and Rupert. The hotels. The meetings. Everything. Her face hardened. That's absurd. You're letting your imagination run wild. I can't believe you're accusing me of this. And just like that, she brushed it off. She didn't deny it outright, didn't try to explain. She just turned it back on me like I was the one at fault for even bringing it up. I felt this overwhelming wave of frustration and helplessness wash over me. I didn't know what to do. I didn't have hard evidence, just what I'd seen in the letter. And she was too damn good at playing the innocent victim. That's when I knew I needed help. I called Jake, told him everything. He didn't even hesitate. We're going to follow her together, he said. If she's hiding something, we'll catch her. And so we did. Over the next few days, Jake and I tailed Kate. We weren't subtle about it either. I was done playing the clueless husband. We followed her to work, to her lunches with Rupert, and sometimes we even saw them leaving the office together, walking a little too close, heading to God knows where. It was all so fucking obvious now. I didn't need the letter to tell me what I already knew. I'd seen it with my own eyes. Kate was cheating on me. And the worst part? She didn't even care enough to hide it properly. It's funny how life throws the most unexpected opportunities at you when you least expect them. I was at a business event for work. One of those dull cocktail parties where people pretend to be interested in what you have to say while mentally calculating how much longer they have to stay before they can leave without it being rude. I didn't want to be there. Hell, my mind was still on Kate, wondering where she was and if she was with Rupert again. And then I saw her, Elizabeth. I'd never met Rupert's wife before, only heard of her in passing, but there she was, standing by the bar, sipping on a glass of red wine, looking like she was just as bored as I was. Rupert was there too, of course, charming his way through the crowd like the smug prick he was. It didn't take long for me to realize Elizabeth had no idea what her husband was up to. She looked detached, alone. I don't know what came over me, but I walked up to her, introduced myself. We talked, made small talk about the event, about the industry. She was polite, but I could tell she wasn't really interested. And why would she be? I was just another guy in the room to her. But then I mentioned Rupert. I don't know if it was the way I said his name or the look on my face, but something shifted. She looked at me, really looked at me, and I could tell she knew. Maybe not the specifics, but she knew something was wrong. I don't mean to pry, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. But do you ever wonder what Rupert's really like when he's not at these events? She stared at me for a long moment before setting her glass down. Why do you ask? I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of what I was about to say. Because I think he's screwing my wife. Elizabeth didn't react the way I thought she would. No choque, no anger. Just this tired, resigned look on her face, like she'd been expecting to hear those words for a long time. Walk with me, she said quietly, leading me outside to a quieter corner of the venue. That's when I told her everything. How I'd been following Kate, how I'd seen her with Rupert, the anonymous letter, all of it. I don't know why I trusted her, but I did. Maybe because she was in the same sinking boat as I was, or maybe because I needed someone, anyone who'd understand. She listened, didn't interrupt, didn't ask questions. Just let me talk until I'd said everything I needed to say. When I finished, there was this long, uncomfortable silence between us. I've had my suspicions, she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. Rupert's been distant for a while. Always working late, always on his phone, but he's good at making excuses. I just didn't want to believe it. Believe it, I said bitterly. He's not just cheating on you. He's making a fool out of both of us. Elizabeth didn't cry, didn't get emotional. Instead, she straightened her back, took a deep breath, and looked me dead in the eye. We need to find out more. Over the next few days, Elizabeth and I started working together. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about knowing the full truth. She promised to talk to some of Rupert's colleagues, people who had worked closely with him for years. She said she'd dig around, see what she could find. And I knew she was serious. You don't mess with someone like Elizabeth. Beneath that polished exterior, there was steel. A week later, she called me. "I've found something," she said, her voice tense. We met at a small cafe, far from the city center, where no one would recognize us. She slid a folder across the table, and I opened it, my heart pounding. Inside were copies of emails, transactions, documents, all pointing to Rupert being involved in some seriously shady business. Not just cheating, but money laundering, bribery, the works. He's been using his position to make deals under the table, Elizabeth explained. It's worse than I thought. He's not just screwing us over. He's screwing over his entire company. I stared at the evidence, feeling a mix of satisfaction and disgust. This was it. This was the dirt we needed. But it wasn't enough just to know. We had to do something with it. Elizabeth and I spent hours talking about what to do next. We could go to the authorities, but that would take time. And who knows if Rupert would worm his way out of it. We needed to hit him where it hurt his reputation, and we needed to do it in a way that would destroy him, both personally and professionally. We need to leak this, I said, the idea forming in my head as I spoke. The press, social media, once this gets out, there's no going back for him. Elizabeth nodded. Agreed. But we need more. If we're going to take him down, we need to be thorough. We need to make sure there's no way he can recover from this. We were in this together now. Two people with broken hearts, united by betrayal and a shared thirst for revenge. It felt strange bonding with her like this, but at the same time, it was liberating. I wasn't alone in this anymore. I had an ally. A few days later, I tried talking to Kate again. I wasn't going to tell her what I'd found. Not yet, but I needed to confront her. I needed to see if she'd admit to anything, if there was even a shred of honesty left in her. Kate, I said, catching her as she was getting ready for work. We need to talk. Now. She gave me that same look of annoyance she always did whenever I brought up anything serious. Oliver, I'm running late. Can we do this later? No. I snapped, my voice harder than I intended. We're doing this now. She sighed, putting down her makeup brush and turning to face me. What is it? I know about you and Rupert, I said bluntly. I know what you've been doing. For a second, just a split second, I saw something flash in her eyes, fear, maybe guilt, but then it was gone, replaced by cold indifference. You're being paranoid again, she said, brushing me off like she always did. I've told you 1,000 times, Rupert is just my boss. You need to stop overthinking things. I followed you, Kate. I saw you two together. And don't pretend like I'm imagining it, because I've seen enough to know the truth. She stared at me, her lips tightening into a thin line. You're unbelievable. Do you really think I'd throw away everything we've built over some stupid fling? That's exactly what you're doing, I said, my voice trembling with anger. And don't think I'm going to let you keep getting away with it. She didn't have a response. She just grabbed her bag and stormed out, slamming the door behind her. She could sense it. She knew I was getting closer to the truth. But she had no idea just how far I was willing to go to make sure she paid for what she'd done. I never imagined I'd be sitting across from Rupert's wife, plotting the downfall of both our spouses. But there I was in a small cafe, sipping on a bitter cup of coffee, going over the details of what had become our shared mission. Elizabeth was calm, focused, and coldly determined. There was no turning back now. We had started this, and we were going to see it through. So, here's what we know, Elizabeth began, laying out a notebook on the table. She had this way of breaking things down like she was orchestrating a business deal. Maybe that's what it was to her, a cold, calculated transaction. We've got enough on Rupert's shady dealings, but we need more concrete evidence to blow this wide open. What we have now, it's just the tip of the iceberg. I nodded, feeling the weight of it all. This wasn't just about Kate anymore. It wasn't just about my broken marriage. It was bigger than that now. Taking Rupert down wasn't just personal. It was about ruining everything he stood for. Elizabeth leaned in, her voice dropping to a whisper, even though no one else was near enough to hear us. I've reached out to some of Rupert's former employees, people he screwed over in the past. One of them, she's willing to testify. She knows a lot about his business practices, things he's hidden from the company, and from me. If we can get her on the record, it'll be enough to start a full investigation. Who is she? I asked, my mind racing. I was already imagining the headlines, the public fallout, the looks on their faces when this all came crashing down. Elizabeth smirked slightly. She's an ex-employee, someone he fired when she got too close to the truth. Her name's Sandra. She's bitter, she's angry, and she's ready to burn it all down. I've already set up a meeting. It was all happening so fast. Part of me wanted to slow down, to think things through, but another part of me, the part that had been drowning in rage and betrayal for weeks, wanted to push forward. This was my chance to get back at Kate. This was my chance to see her world crumble, just like she'd done to mine. As we went over the details, something shifted between us. It wasn't just about the plan anymore. Elizabeth and I started sharing more personal things. At first, it was just about Rupert and Kate, the betrayals we'd both suffered, the lies we'd been fed. But then it became more than that. We talked about our lives before this mess. She told me about her childhood, growing up with a father who was just as manipulative as Rupert, always making her feel like she was never good enough. I told her about my own insecurities, how I'd always been second-guessing myself, even before Kate's betrayal. It felt strange. We were bonding over something toxic, but it also felt good to have someone who understood. I wasn't alone in this anymore. Elizabeth wasn't just an ally. She was someone I could confide in. And for a moment, just a brief moment, I felt something. A connection. It wasn't love. It wasn't even lust. But it was something. We didn't act on it, though. We were both too caught up in the plan, too focused on the task at hand. And maybe that was for the best. We were using each other, sure, but we also needed each other to get through this. But as focused as I was on the plan, my life outside of it was falling apart. Work was becoming unbearable. I couldn't concentrate, couldn't focus on anything except the anger that was festering inside me. My boss pulled me aside one day, asking if everything was okay. He could see I was distracted, slipping up on deadlines, missing meetings. I lied, told him everything was fine, but I could tell he didn't believe me. I was barely holding it together. Between following Kate, plotting revenge with Elizabeth, and dealing with the fallout of my personal life, I was spread too thin. Every night, I'd come home and find Kate acting like nothing had changed, still playing the part of the perfect wife. It made me sick. She had no idea what was coming. Then one day, Elizabeth and I were meeting up again to go over the final details of our plan. We'd gotten enough information from Sandra to start making moves, and we were discussing how to leak it to the press. We were sitting at this small cafe, tucked away in a corner, when I saw him. Rupert. He walked in, casually scanning the room before his eyes landed on us. For a split second, our gazes met, and I swear I felt my heart stop. There was a flicker of recognition in his eyes, but he didn't say anything. He just walked to the counter, ordered a coffee, and left without a word. Elizabeth looked at me, her face pale. Do you think he knows? I shook my head, trying to stay calm. He might suspect something, but there's no way he knows what we're up to. Not yet. Still, the tension between us was palpable. If Rupert caught on, it could ruin everything. But we couldn't stop now. We were too deep into this. A few days later, we finally got the compromising material together. Elizabeth had been working behind the scenes, contacting journalists, getting everything ready. We were going to release it all at once. The business scandals, the cheating, everything. Once it was out there, Rupert wouldn't be able to recover. His career, his reputation, his marriage, all of it would be destroyed. But there was still one more thing I had to do. I had to confront Kate again. This time, I wasn't going to let her get away with brushing me off. I needed to see her face when it all came crashing down. The day had finally come. Elizabeth and I had worked tirelessly, gathering every last piece of dirt on Rupert. His shady business dealings, his affairs, his whole career built on lies. It was all there, packaged and ready to blow up in his face. We handed over the files to the journalists, watched as they flipped through the documents, their eyes widening with every page. They knew this was going to be a massive story, and we knew that once it hit, Rupert's life would be over. It didn't take long for the first article to drop. Corporate scandal. London executive accused of fraud, bribery, and infidelity. Bold headline, splashed across every major news outlet. The media frenzy was immediate. Rupert's name was everywhere, his face plastered on every screen. The press was ruthless, digging into every dark corner of his life, and the public ate it up. Within days, his business was in freefall. Investors started pulling out, his board of directors panicked, and his once loyal team began scrambling to save their own skins. Rupert, the man who had been untouchable, was now at the center of a public storm, drowning in accusations. Elizabeth and I watched from the sidelines, and for a moment it felt good. No, it felt great. We'd done it. We'd brought him down. But then, something unexpected happened. As the days passed, and I watched Rupert's life crumble, I started to feel something else: guilt. At first, it was just a small voice in the back of my head, whispering doubts I didn't want to hear. But it grew louder. What the hell had I become? Was I any better than Rupert? I had spent weeks plotting, lying, and manipulating just like he had. The satisfaction of revenge started to sour, and I began to question if it was worth it. That night, I couldn't sleep. The headlines kept flashing in my mind, and I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that I had gone too far. Yes, Rupert deserved it. He deserved every bit of what was happening to him. But what about me? Was this who I was now? Someone who destroyed lives to get even? It didn't sit right. I decided it was time to confront Kate. I needed to look her in the eyes, hear her excuses one last time, and then I'd be done with it. I couldn't carry this weight around anymore. When I got home, Kate was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone, completely oblivious to the shitstorm that was about to hit her. I stood in the doorway for a moment, just watching her. This was the woman I'd loved for years, the woman I thought I knew. But after everything, she felt like a stranger. "Kate," I said, my voice flat and cold. "We need to talk." She looked up at me, her face blank at first, but then I saw something shift in her eyes, fear, maybe, or the realization that things were about to change. "What's going on?" she asked, setting her phone down. "I know everything," I said, stepping closer. "I know about Rupert. I know about the affair. And I know about all the bullshit you've been hiding from me." She flinched but tried to compose herself. "Oliver, it's not what you think. Don't fucking lie to me," I snapped, my voice rising. "I've seen it. I've followed you. I've watched you with him, Kate. And I know about the hotels, the late-night meetings, everything. You've been lying to me for months." She stood up, her face turning red with anger. "And what? You're perfect? You've never made mistakes? Jesus, Oliver, you're acting like I'm the only one who's ever done something wrong." That hit me like a punch to the gut. Was she seriously trying to turn this on me? "Don't you dare try to justify this," I growled, stepping closer. "You cheated on me, Kate. You lied to me over and over again. Don't pretend this is my fault." Her eyes flashed with frustration, but I could see the cracks starting to form. The guilt, the shame, it was all there, hiding just beneath the surface. I did what I had to do, she spat. You don't understand how hard it is to be in my position. Rupert, he promised me things. He said he could help my career, that if I supported him, I'd get ahead. And I cut her off, my blood boiling. So you sold yourself for a promotion? That's your excuse. Tears welled up in her eyes, but I didn't care. I couldn't care anymore. It wasn't like that, she whispered, her voice cracking. It wasn't just about that. I thought I was doing what I needed to do for us. For our future. For us. I couldn't help but laugh, bitter and hollow. This was never about us. This was about you. You did this for yourself. You fucked Rupert for your own selfish reasons. And you think I'm supposed to just, what? Understand? She didn't answer. She couldn't. And I realized, in that moment, that I didn't care what her reasons were anymore. It didn't matter. Do you know what we've done? I asked, my voice shaking. Elizabeth and we've destroyed him. Rupert's finished. His business, his reputation gone. And you? You're just as responsible for this as he is. Kate stared at me, her face pale. What are you talking about? The journalists, the evidence, it's all out there now, I said, stepping closer, towering over her. Rupert's done. He's going to lose everything. And so are you. Her hands flew to her mouth as the realization hit her. Oh my God! Oliver, you didn't— I did, I said, my voice cold. And there's no going back now. For the first time in months, I saw real fear in her eyes. She wasn't just scared of losing Rupert or her career. She was scared of me, of what I'd become. And in that moment, I didn't feel any satisfaction. Just emptiness. The argument ended in shouting, tears, and slammed doors. Kate was a wreck, but I was too numb to care. I'd done what I set out to do. I'd destroyed her world, just like she'd destroyed mine. But as I stood there, watching her fall apart, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd lost something too. The man I used to be? He was gone. And what was left? I wasn't sure I liked. The day Kate and I finally sat down to sign the divorce papers, it felt like the weight of the world was pressing down on me. I had been numb for weeks, going through the motions, finishing what needed to be done, but not really feeling anything. Maybe that was the only way to survive something like this. To shut it all off, turn everything inside you cold. We met at a solicitor's office. I walked in first, trying to keep my composure, and found her sitting at a small table, nervously tapping her foot against the leg of the chair. She looked smaller than I remembered, as if everything that had happened had worn her down to a shadow of herself. But I didn't feel sorry for her. Not anymore. Oliver, she started, her voice shaky. Can't we just— No. I cut her off. I was done with the begging, the apologies, the guilt trips. We've gone through this already. There's no going back. She opened her mouth as if to argue, but then she closed it, staring down at the papers in front of her. The room was silent except for the sound of the ticking clock on the wall. The air was heavy, thick with everything we weren't saying. I loved you, she whispered, as if that would change anything. I didn't respond. Love didn't fix betrayal. It didn't erase the lies, the cheating, the mess we'd made of each other. The truth was whatever love we once had was dead. There was no saving it. After what felt like an eternity, she signed the papers, her hand trembling as she scribbled her name on the dotted line. I followed suit, my signature feeling final, like a nail in the coffin of everything we had built together. And that was it. We didn't say goodbye. We didn't hug or make any promises to stay in touch. We just walked out of each other's lives. A clean break, but messy in every other way that mattered. A few days later, I met with Elizabeth one last time. It was a strange meeting, no longer filled with the urgency or fire that had driven us before. We sat in the same cafe where we'd planned everything, but now the energy between us was different. The revenge was done. Rupert's life was in ruins, and Kate's career had tanked along with his. They were both scrambling to pick up the pieces, but that wasn't our problem anymore. This is it, isn't it? Elizabeth said, sipping her tea and looking out the window, avoiding eye contact. I nodded. Yeah, it's over. We didn't need to say much more. The bond we had formed, built on mutual anger and betrayal, was fading. We had used each other to get through the storm, but now that the storm had passed, there wasn't much left. We both knew that revenge was only a phase, a temporary alliance that had served its purpose. You're going to be okay, she said, her eyes finally meeting mine. You'll figure things out. I wasn't so sure, but I nodded anyway. You too. And just like that, we parted ways. No dramatic farewell, no lingering looks. Just two people who had shared something dark and twisted. Moving on. After everything was said and done, I was left with myself. No more Kate. No more Elizabeth. No more plans for revenge or sleepless nights obsessing over betrayal. It was just me. At first, the quiet was unbearable. I didn't know what to do with myself. I kept replaying everything in my head, the lies, the confrontation, the destruction we'd caused, and I wondered if I had made the right choices. Had I gone too far? Was I any better than the people I had destroyed? But as the days turned into weeks, I started to realize something. Revenge might have felt good in the moment, but it wasn't what gave me strength. It was moving past it. It was accepting that life was messy and painful, but that didn't mean I had to live in the wreckage. I started going back to the gym, something I hadn't done in months. I picked up old hobbies I'd abandoned during the chaos. Watching football, meeting up with friends, hell, even reading again. I wasn't fully healed. Not yet. But I was starting to remember who I was before all of this had swallowed me whole. The truth was, Kate's betrayal had broken me in ways I hadn't expected. It made me question everything about myself, my worth, my choices, my ability to trust. But as time passed, I realized that betrayal didn't define me. Neither did revenge. Those were just chapters in a much longer story. I started to think about what I really wanted from life. What kind of man I wanted to be moving forward. It wasn't easy, but little by little I started building something new. Something better. I realized that true strength wasn't about tearing people down, even when they deserved it. It was about rising above the shit they threw at you and choosing not to let it turn you into someone you hated. So, here I am. Not perfect, not fully healed, but better. Stronger. I'm not chasing revenge anymore. Not trying to fix what's broken. I'm just moving forward, one step at a time. I don't know what the future holds, but for the first time in a long time, I'm ready for it. Whatever it is,